Today happens to be St. Patrick's Day.
It does.
And so it would be fun for us to spend a couple of minutes just talking about St. Patrick, because he, in a way, is an illustration of this idea. So if you guys aren't aware, there's all kinds of myths around St. Patrick's Day. And I would say the way our culture celebrates it, right? It really is,
it's almost antithetical.
Yeah, it kind of almost is. But it's actually based in a true story. Yeah. And so being a history guy, you and I actually had the chance to teach through church history a while back. And we spent some time on this character of St. Patrick because he is so influential in Christianity. So let's see if I can make this short, because we spent like an hour and a half teaching this.
We did.
But the Roman Empire, interestingly enough, never conquered Ireland.
Right.
The people were just too wild and too crazy. Yep. And so what's interesting is it's the Irish who ended up holding on to the classic, works of Roman literature and all of those things, Latin, because of this guy named St. Patrick. And kind of here's how it happened. Patrick, as a young man, was kidnapped, taken over to Ireland. His actual name was Maewyn Sucat, which doesn't sound nearly as cool as St. Patrick, right? Or as Irish. But he eventually escaped. But then in a vision, God told him he needed to go back and evangelize the Irish people who had been his captors. Yeah. And he was obedient to that vision. Yeah. And so he went back, and what he did was he embedded himself into their villages and into their societies. And he knew from having lived among them that they had this pantheon of gods, and their gods were really gods who played tricks on them. Hence the leprechauns, hence the hunting for the pot of gold, all of these kind of things that are kind of a part of Irish lore. And so he realized the gospel gave them a better story. Yeah. They weren't just traditions or elemental philosophies. The Irish were this really kind of, hardened people who lived on this island and were warriors. Well, he began to realize, I can give them a better story because the true gospel is the better story. And as he began to evangelize them, he would evangelize entire communities at a time. And he would demonstrate to them that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't play tricks on you.
That's right.
That there was a God, the Irish were very in touch with the natural creation, living on an island where they did. They were very into agricultural, especially among animals, those kind of things. And he said, that's a wonderful thing, but there's a God who created all of this.
That's right.
And so he taught them to write songs, right, to the creator instead of just fixating on the created. Yeah. So all of these things came together, right? And he did this amazing job of evangelizing, and transforming the culture, because he believed that to read and write, you could then, pass on the gospel. Right. Literature found its resurgence. And again, his monks were the ones who copied when all of the libraries of Rome burned because of the Vandals and the Goths. It was actually this little island, totally forgotten about by the rest of the world, that kept libraries and monasteries that would keep all of these classical works alive.
That's right. There are works there that we would not have. Yeah. Had they not been
You wouldn't read Homer, right? The Iliad, the Odyssey. You wouldn't have the works of Plato or Aristotle passed down, from the Greeks to the Romans, if it wasn't for St. Patrick and his monks who copied all of those things because they believed that all truth was God's truth.
That's exactly right. Again, when you search for truth, you land on Jesus, right? Because he's the way, the truth, and so that earnest search for the truth. And in art, right? Yeah. They had tons of art there that was preserved for us because of the isolation of the island.
Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do in word or deed, do it all as you're doing it for the Lord and not for men. Yep. And so they transformed art because this art was all made in honor of the creator God who enabled them to create things. Yep. And so, they sent out missionaries. Yeah. They established cities around these monasteries because they were hubs of learning. Yep. And of course, they developed spiritual practices. The Irish were renowned for their prayer books, for their spiritual disciplines, for the way that they went to difficult places and would establish beachheads of mission.
And all of that was in response to the gospel.
That's it.
Right? That's the thing to keep in mind. This wasn't done so they earned salvation. This was done in response to God's calling on them. Yeah. And this is, again, a wild and unbridled people that held him hostage. Yeah. And he got called back as a missionary.
Isn't that incredible?
Think about that faith, right? To understanding God's calling, and then to generate more missionaries to go do the same thing.
Yeah, and the contextualization of the message that he won the Irish through the word, preaching a true and better gospel, people, indeed, living out the biblical principles among the people.
That's right.
And so I love it, right? That really truth is better than fiction.
It is.
So there's no evidence, sorry to burst your bubble, that Patrick banished snakes from Ireland. There's no proof that he used the three-leaf shamrock to impact the doctrine of the Trinity, nor is there evidence that it was Patrick who combined pagan and Christian imagery into the Celtic cross. But his faithfulness left a legacy greater than he could have imagined.
Yeah, all the people say amen.
Yeah, it's good. So I think it'd be great to end with a little bit of St. Patrick's breastplate, which was his famous prayer.
Absolutely.
Here, because I think it connects well to the idea that Jesus is at the center of all things and holds all things together. And so this isn't the whole prayer. You can look it up online, but it's also called the Deer's Cry or the Voice of the Irish. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through the confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. Later he says, Christ, to shield me today against poison, against burning, against drowning, against wounding, so that many come to me in abundance of reward. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, and Christ in every ear that hears me.
Amen.
That's a pretty Jesus-centered prayer.
Fairly Jesus-centered, yes.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
It's a good way to end our time together.